This is your host, Danny, and this is English Plus, a podcast by Plus Podcast Network. Today, we're going to talk about the six senses. We will talk about words we can use to describe what happens with these six senses. But before we do that, let me remind you that you can subscribe to Plus Podcast Network and have access to all our podcasts. There are 20 of them. Some of them are free, so you can access them anytime you want, wherever you want. But some of them are premium. And if you want to subscribe, there are two ways. You can go to Apple Podcasts and subscribe to all our shows in one place. You can also try it out for 7 days. I have added a 7-day free trial for the channel so that you can check the range of episodes that you will get when you subscribe before you decide to commit or not. Or if you don't have Apple Podcasts, or if you prefer to listen to all the podcasts on our website, you can become a patron of Plus Podcast Network on Patreon, and then you will have access to all our shows on our website, EnglishPlusPodcast.com. You can find the links in the description of the episode if you would like to go and check it out. And now, without further ado, let's start talking about the six senses. So let's first start talking about the five senses. Now, what are the five senses? The five senses, of course, are sight, hearing, taste, touch, and smell. And we will talk about these in more detail. And of course, the more detail we will talk about is that I will provide you with some words you can use to describe what happens with these five senses. Again, the five senses are sight, hearing, taste, touch, and smell. Now, what is sometimes referred to as a sixth sense or extrasensory perception is a power to be aware of things independently of the five physical senses. It's a kind of supernatural sense. Now, you might know that, you might have it. You might have those strange feelings, but they are true. You feel that things are going to happen, and they do. And we will talk about the sixth sense as well after we finish talking about the first five physical senses. Now, before we start talking about sight, which is the first that we're going to talk about from the five senses, I need to tell you that the five verbs referring to the senses are modified by an adjective rather than an adverb. What does that mean? That means when we say, he looks, or the trip sounds, or the cake tastes, or it felt, or the soup smelled, etc. These verbs, they are verbs to describe the five senses, right? When we use these verbs to refer to the senses, we modify these verbs by an adjective, not an adverb. So we say, for example, he looks dreadful, not dreadfully, he looks dreadful. Now, we usually use adverbs after verbs to modify verbs, but not with these verbs. These verbs that refer to the five physical senses, they are modified by an adjective rather than an adverb. So, he looks dreadful, not dreadfully. The trip sounds marvelous, not marvelously, marvelous. The cake tastes good, not well. The cake tastes good. It felt strange. The soup smelled delicious. So you see what I mean? We use these verbs, these five verbs referring to the senses with adjectives if we want to modify the verbs, of course. And now let's start talking about the first sense, and that is sight. This is coming next. Some verbs we can use are all related to sight, but they are kind of different. I will start with a very small story, and then I will stop at the verbs and talk about the verbs in more detail. Now, the story is that of an eyewitness who saw a policeman watching somebody and then arrest this person. This small account goes like, yesterday I glanced out of the window and noticed a policeman observing a house opposite through binoculars. I thought I glimpsed a man inside the house. Then I saw that there was a man peering into the window of the same house. I gazed at them, wondering what they were doing. Suddenly, the policeman stopped staring through his binoculars. He went to arrest the other man as he started to climb into the house through the window. I realized that I had witnessed a crime. So, here, the story is very simple, but we have a few verbs related to the sense of sight. Let's take a look at these verbs. first, yesterday I glanced out of the window. Now, when you glance out of the window, you take a quick look out of the window like a casual look. You are not looking for a specific purpose. I glanced over there. I just looked over there. It is not on purpose. You are just looking around and you glanced. Usually it is quick. You don't glance for a long time because it's just a glance, right? So here, if you want to talk about this kind of looking, you say glance. Of course, you can say, I looked out of the window. That's fine. You can say, I looked out of the window. But here, knowing more verbs or more words to talk about sight is definitely better and makes your story or the things you're talking about more specific. So I glanced out of the window and noticed a policeman observing a house opposite through binoculars. Now, if you look out of your window and everything is normal, then you don't notice anything. You don't see anything special so that it can hold your attention. When you see something different, something strange, something interesting, something whatever, but out of the ordinary, you notice. You notice because this thing drew your attention. It is not a regular thing. It is not the same thing I see every day when I glanced out of the window or when I look out of the window. So I noticed a policeman. That was something different, so I noticed it. I noticed a policeman observing a house opposite through binoculars. So when you look through binoculars, obviously, you are not just looking around unless you are looking at birds. But even when you look at birds, you're observing birds. You're observing birds. You're doing that on purpose because you are actually watching the birds. Now, in the case of this policeman, he was observing the house opposite, so that means he was watching the house on purpose, maybe because the policeman knew somebody would come to rob the house, or maybe he was just doing that regularly. But definitely he was not just looking around, he was observing the house, doing that on purpose, watching the house on purpose. Now, for a policeman, that's okay to hold binoculars and look at houses because that's his job or her job. But if you do that from your own house and you observe other people's houses, that is not cool at all and sometimes illegal. So don't do that at home, okay? But here, the policeman was observing the house. And then I thought I glimpsed a man inside the house. Now, when you glimpse, you see something very quickly and usually you are not sure of what you saw. And sometimes you may even doubt yourself. Well, I glimpsed something, but I'm not sure if I even saw anything. See what I mean? Sometimes you see something that is very quick, so you start to doubt what you see. Maybe I didn't see anything at all. Maybe I just imagined I saw something. But here, according to this account of this eyewitness, I thought I glimpsed a man. I thought I saw something inside the house that looked like a man, so it's a glimpse. It's quicker than a glance. So if you were thinking we talked about glance at the beginning, yes, glance is fast, but not as fast as glimpse. Glimpse is even faster. So I thought I glimpsed a man inside the house. Then I saw, of course, saw is the verb that we use all the time when we talk about sight, see, the past of see. Then I saw that there was a man peering into the window of the same house. Now, when you peer into a window, that means you come very close to the window and you try to see what's inside. Now, most of the time that tells you that this person is going to do something not very cool, or in this case, not illegal. Because when you're peering into the window, like in this example, that means you are looking into a place and you don't want anybody to see you. So most of the time, this is sinister in nature, and maybe sometimes it is not that sinister. Maybe sometimes it's an innocent peering into a place to see if there's anybody there. Maybe you want to help if there is someone there. So peering is not always sinister, it's not always bad, but usually it is. And then I gazed at them, wondering what they were doing. So at first, I glanced out of the window. I was just looking casually, and I noticed the policeman, blah, blah, blah. And then I gazed at them. Now I was interested. My attention was focused on them. I gazed at them. I looked hard at them. I was following them with my eyes. This time, I was not only looking, I gazed at them. And then the policeman stopped staring through his binoculars. Now, of course, if you're using the binoculars, you're looking at something and you're focusing on one thing. So also, it's like gazing. And here we have another word for it, and that is staring. So the policeman stopped staring. He went to arrest the man who was obviously trying to rob the house. And then I realized that I had witnessed a crime. Now, when you see a crime this way, and you can testify in court later that I saw everything, so that is what we call witnessing a crime. So all of these verbs, glance, notice, observe, glimpse, saw, peer, gaze, stare, and witness, they all have to do with sight. But I told you how slightly different from each other they can be. So I hope you can use them in your own speaking and writing, because it's not always just look, see, those two verbs. Yes, I know these two verbs are the most important verbs, but they are not the only ones. Sometimes you want to use more details. You want to say that, no, I didn't look, I glanced. There's a difference. Now you know the difference. Let's move to the next sense, and that is hearing. For hearing, we will just talk about the scale of loudness. So let's do that next.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Looking to enhance your English skills while exploring a world of knowledge? Then English Plus Podcast website is just for you. Dive into diverse topics ranging from science to literature, history to business, and myths to modern insights. Each episode from our podcast or article from our magazine is a journey of learning and discovery, designed to not only improve your language skills, but also broaden your understanding of the world. Join us at English Plus Podcast, where language meets limitless learning. Tune in today and take your English to the next level. Visit EnglishPlusPodcast.com to start your journey. English Plus Podcast, language, learning, enlightenment. Never stop learning with English Plus. So, for hearing, I will be very quick, and I will talk about the scale of loudness. Now, how loud a place is, how loud a machine is, etc. But we're just describing the noise. Now, a place can be noiseless. But this is, to be honest, you might say, yeah, my room is noiseless, and that's not true. Your room can be silent, but in most cases quiet, because there is noise everywhere. Because there is no place on earth with no noise at all. That is so strange. Zero noise, there's always noise, but there is some places with noise levels that we can't even notice. First of all, because our hearing can't catch this level of noise. And a second thing, that because it's not significant, we choose, or our ears, our brains actually, choose to disregard this level of noise, and they perceive, or we perceive the world as quiet or as silent. But there is no place on earth that is noiseless. Of course, there are places that are noiseless, but these are places that we create. Inside special rooms, no noise at all. Even that's very, very difficult. But, that can happen. And then, as I said, the place can be silent. You can't hear anything. It's silent. Maybe because there's nobody, or there's nothing on, no machines, no TV on, nothing. The place is silent. If it goes a little bit up, it can be quiet. There are some noises, but like in nature, and they're just the sounds of distant birds and leaves or stuff like that, or maybe some water from the distance. That is usually pleasant, and it's not high. The level of noise is not high at all. It's pleasant, but we cannot say it's silent. There are some noises, or there are some sounds, I would say. And here we can call the place quiet. Or maybe where you live, your neighborhood can be quiet. Or noisy. That's the next word. Can be noisy. There are a lot of noises. So for quiet doesn't mean that there are no noises. But the noises are to a minimum, and it is not bothering at all. So you can hear maybe children playing, but it's distant. It is not annoying. It's not noisy. When it starts to become annoying, you say it is noisy. Now, noisy is still not very bad, but it is not pleasant. Maybe it's not okay if you want to maybe take a nap or sleep at night and it is noisy. You can't sleep because it is noisy, and sometimes some people can do that. Some people can sleep in noisy areas. Some people, but definitely not the next two levels. When it becomes too noisy, it becomes loud. And if your neighbor is having a party and the music is so loud, it's not about just being annoyed. It's about the level of noise can hurt your ears. And if it goes even beyond that, when you go to some parties and the music is too loud and that loudness can actually damage your ears, this is what we call deafening noise. So I'll go back the scale of loudness from no noise at all, and that is what we call noiseless. Then we go up, we say silent, then up, we say quiet, then up, noisy, loud, and deafening. So that was what I wanted to tell you about hearing. Now let's talk about taste. Now let me first start by talking about the most common tastes. When you want to describe tastes, of course, here we have a lot of words to describe tastes, but I'm just going to talk about the main words. So we can say that something is sweet, like when we talk about honey, or salty, like when we talk about chips. Chips are usually salty. Honey is sweet. What about strong coffee? What do we call strong coffee? It is bitter. Sometimes that can be unpleasant, but for coffee, especially for people who love coffee like myself, that is a pleasant taste, even if it is bitter. Now, sometimes bitter taste doesn't mean bad. It depends, of course, on the kind of food or the kind of beverage you're consuming. Sometimes it's good, like in coffee. Sometimes it's bad if it is in certain dishes or even certain beverages. Anyway, so we have sweet like honey, salty like chips, bitter like strong coffee, or vinegar. When we want to describe vinegar, we say it's sour. This kind of taste, like the vinegar taste, we say it's sour. Or what about Indian food? Maybe you love Indian food, maybe you don't. I love it, by the way. But if we want to describe Indian food, we say it's spicy. Spicy because there are a lot of spices and it's usually hot. So that is Indian food. And now, since I mentioned the word hot, if you say that something tastes hot, it may mean spicy rather than not cold. But it can also mean not cold. So the food can be hot, that means it's not cold, the opposite of cold. But to be honest, most of the time when people use hot to describe tastes, they are talking about spicy food. Like when they say Indian food or other kinds of food where they put a lot of spices. And of course, it is usually hot. That's what we usually use the word for. But remember, the word hot essentially means not cold. So you can talk about the food that is hot, like hot soup. If you say hot soup, that doesn't mean that it is spicy, or doesn't necessarily mean it's spicy. Hot soup, it's simply not cold, which is how usually soup should be. So remember, this word can be used for both spicy or not cold. Now, if a curry, say, is not particularly hot, we can say it is mild. So sometimes, not all Indian food, especially Indian food that is served to people who are not used to it, it can be served with less spices and then it becomes what we call mild. Not hot, but mild. And now let's talk about something else, and that is when the food is tasty or delicious. Now we can say that food is tasty, whatever kind of food you're talking about. The food can be tasty or delicious, and that is something I'm very sure that everybody knows about. But sometimes people use the word tasteful to talk about food that is delicious, and that is not the word to use. Now, it might sound that it is the same. Tasty, tasteful. What's the difference? Well, there is a difference. You can say food is tasty, and that's fine, but tasteful does not talk about food. You don't use tasteful to talk about food. You use tasteful to talk about furnishings, architecture, or style of dressing or behavior, etc. So, tasty and tasteful are different. Tasty for food, tasteful for furnishings, architecture, or a style of dressing or behavior, but the opposite is the same. We can still use tasteless for both, the opposite of both. If you want to talk about furnishing or architecture that is not tasteful, that is just the opposite, you can say tasteless. Or if you want to talk about food that is not tasty, you can say it is tasteless. Or bland. Sometimes bland, that means it's not bad, but there is no taste. You can't taste anything. Everything tastes the same. That is bland. That's just like hospital food. So, with that being said, we talked about taste, we talked about hearing, we talked about sight. We still have touch, smell, and sixth sense. So, that is next. So, for the touch, we can use different verbs to talk about touch. Now, I'll give you some examples. For example, she poked me in the ribs with her elbow to wake me up. If you want to grab somebody's attention, you can poke them. But of course, use that at your own discretion because that can be very annoying, especially when you do it all the time. Now, there's a very annoying bad habit when you poke people to get them to look at you. When you talk to people, or when some people talk to other people, and those other people just turn their head around for some reason, maybe because they think they saw something, whatever. And those other people, the annoying ones, they poke them. They keep poking because they want you to look at them. That can be very annoying. But the word poke itself can be used. Like in this example, she poked me in the ribs or wherever with her elbow to wake me up. Okay, that is to poke. Or what about cats and dogs? We can stroke a cat. I would say he stroked the cat and patted the dog. We usually stroke cats, we pat dogs. Now, sometimes people do good things and you want to kind of congratulate them or to tell them good job or whatever, so you can tap on their shoulders. Now, some people don't like it, so be careful about using this stuff. I'm just telling you about the verbs, the words, the language. I'm not telling you do this or don't do that. That's up to you. You make your decision. You know when it is appropriate to tap somebody on the shoulder or not. But usually people do that when they want to say good job to somebody, they tap them on the shoulder. But remember, that can be inappropriate in some cultures, so don't use it anywhere. Okay, that's up to you. You decide. You know your culture better than I do. Now, we can also use grasp. Like, for example, she grasped my hand and we ran. But when you grasp, you hold tightly. So she held my hand tightly, but instead of saying she held my hand tightly, that is a little bit long. So I can say she grasped my hand and we ran. Or, for example, she grabbed her phone and ran to the bus stop. Now, some people, you see them, they're in a hurry, so they grab something and they go on their way to do whatever they want to do. And grabbing here can have positive and negative meanings, of course. But if you want to talk about something a thief would do, we don't usually use grab, we use snatch. The thief snatched her handbag and disappeared into the crowd. Now, of course, there are other things. We can say press the button. Now, of course, nowadays we have buttons all around us. There are buttons you need to press. That is the verb you use with buttons. You press the button. I have also another verb for you, and that is handle. Like when you say, please handle the goods with great care. Because the goods are fragile. They can be broken easily, so handle them with great care. So that is about touch. What about smell? Let's hear about that next. So for smells, of course, you can say, I smell something, or this thing smells. And remember, if we want to use it in this sense, we use adjectives after it. So we can say this thing smells good, not smells well, okay? We use the adjective to modify. But I'm not going to talk about these verbs because we already talked about them anyway. I'm going to talk about very unpleasant smells, how to describe very unpleasant smells, and how to describe pleasant smells. Now, for very unpleasant smells, you can say stinking. Stinking smell, very unpleasant. Foul smelling, putrid, or musty. Now, musty is used specially to talk about smelling unpleasantly old and slightly damp. That is musty. But all the others are very unpleasant. Or pungent, smelling very strong and often unpleasantly so. That is pungent. Like sometimes cheese. For some people, it is pungent. For some other people, they like it, like when we talk about blue cheese. It depends whether you like it or not, but sometimes it is too much even for cheese lovers. Anyway, what about pleasant smells? For pleasant smells, we can say fragrant, aromatic, sweet-smelling, perfumed, or scented. Now, why am I telling you about these adjectives? Because I don't want you to use good or bad all the time. It smells good, it smells bad, it smells good, it smells bad. Well, that's okay. You can use smells good and smells bad. Smells awful. Okay. You have another word. Smells wonderful. Perfect. It's not about just good, bad, wonderful, awful. You can use specific words to talk about specific smells. Now, of course, there are a lot of words you can use to describe smells, and I'm not an expert when it comes to smells and different kinds of smells, but there are a lot of ways you can describe specific smell. Now, some people who are experts, they have a word for every single different kind of smell. But for us, for regular people, we can use some other words to talk about bad smells and good smells, unpleasant smells and pleasant smells. These words are good enough if you learn them so that you don't always say it smells good, it smells bad. You have other words to use. Now, we come to the very last point of our episode for today, and that is the sixth sense. So when it comes to the sixth sense, what do we mean by that? Now, this cannot be explained scientifically most of the time. Well, maybe some cases can be explained scientifically in a way or another, but most of these cases are not explained yet scientifically. And I'm saying yet because maybe in the future they will figure out why these things happen and they have a scientific explanation or something. But for now, when we see these things are kind of considered like supernatural when people can do this. And yes, a lot of people pretend to have a sixth sense and they pretend to have experienced some of the phenomena I'm going to talk about, but some of them actually do. And again, as I'm telling you, we're not here to explain it scientifically because I'm not really sure that science understands these things yet. But anyway, what kind of different phenomena we're talking about which a person with a sixth sense may experience? We have telepathy. What is the meaning of telepathy? Now, telepathy is experiencing someone else's feelings even though you are apart. Like what happens with twins. I'm sure you've heard of these stories about twins that can feel what is happening with the other twin when they are apart. Of course, when they're next to each other, that's not a big deal. But when they are apart, twins that were separated at birth and then after years, they felt that something wrong was happening, and it turned out to be that this bad feeling they had was because their twin was having a hard time or maybe a problem, physical problem, etc., whatever. So that is telepathy. Now, how that happens, no one really knows. But this is not what we're here to talk about. Remember, this is not Science Plus, this is English Plus. Okay, so we have telepathy. Let's talk about another phenomenon. Premonition. What does that mean? Premonition, that is knowing something is going to happen before it occurs. You have this feeling. That is what we call premonition. That is when people start seeing signs and omens and stuff, and they tell you that this thing is going to happen and that thing is going to happen. They may tell you that they had a dream about it or something like that, but they have this strong feeling that something is going to happen. They know, actually, for them, they know that this is going to happen and it happens. That is premonition. And that is something we call sixth sense because it cannot be explained scientifically yet. Now, maybe the next phenomenon is more natural and you would know it because it happened to you at one time. It almost happened to everybody, and that is intuition. That is the instinctive understanding of something. Sometimes you make decisions not based on data, not based on knowing that this is the best decision, but just based on your instinctive understanding of something. And that is what we call intuition. Now, of course, in some cases that might be bad because you need to depend on science and hard evidence and data and stuff. But sometimes it is important, it is necessary, especially when a creative solution is needed. So your intuition, people with intuition, or what we call people who are intuitive, are needed because it's not always about hard science. We are human beings after all. But for intuition, I'm pretty sure that you have experienced that at one stage of your life, or at least you know somebody who has. And finally, the last one, or the last phenomenon I want to talk about is what we call déjà vu. And déjà vu obviously is a French word that means in English seen before. So, but we don't say it's seen before. The phenomenon is seen before. Have you ever heard of that? No, and you will never hear about it because the French counterpart, the French translation is used here, like when we say café or fiancé. We usually use those, okay? We use those French words, and here it's déjà vu. Now, déjà vu, what does that mean? It means an inexplicable feeling that you have already been somewhere or experienced something before. Now, sometimes you go to a place and you have this feeling, the déjà vu feeling. You have this feeling. It's like you know that you haven't been to this place before, can't remember coming to this place at all. Maybe it's another country. You never know. But you have this déjà vu feeling that I have been here before. I can't explain that, but I have this feeling. Or when you see somebody and this person looks familiar. So you have this déjà vu feeling that I have seen this person before. But it happens more with places, by the way. A déjà vu usually about places or general experiences. That is what we call déjà vu. You might have had a déjà vu before because that also happens with everybody. Maybe for telepathy and premonition, it doesn't happen to a lot of people, but for intuition and déjà vu, that happens to a lot of people. And maybe it is not that supernatural, but that is sixth sense, because explain it to me if you will. Explain it to me scientifically, and then I will say that it is not sixth sense. But that is what we call sixth sense. telepathy, premonition, intuition, deja vu, and there are some others, but of course, I'm not going to talk about all of them. So let me wrap it up and tell you again that we talked today about the senses, and we talked about some useful words we can use to describe the senses, some verbs that go with these senses, or adjectives, or some phenomena like in the sixth sense. So I hope you found that useful, and I hope you take these things that you've learned today and use them in your everyday language, whether you want to use them in speaking or in writing. Remember that you can find more on our website, EnglishPlusPodcast.com. Just go to the website and look at the many different types of posts that we create and add every day. Some of them have exercises, some of them have PDF downloadable worksheets that I make just to help you get your English to a better place. Now, of course, English is not the only thing there is in English Plus. We have other things, and the ones that have been with us for a while know that we have stories, mythology, etc. We have other things because English is not just grammar and vocabulary. You know that. You need to know about culture, stories, and other things because that is what real English is about. You need to think about stories, context, different things in English, and that will help your language better than just talking about grammar and vocabulary. And actually, I have enhanced this with the other shows I added to Plus Podcast Network. Now we have History Plus, Science Plus, Stories Plus, Fiction Plus, Fantasy Guest Plus. I want you to check that out because it's kind of funny. And to be honest, most of these are free, so you can still listen to a lot of them for free. But I have added a couple of them as premium podcasts. So if you would like to have access to these podcasts, as I told you at the beginning of the episode, you can go to Apple Podcasts, subscribe there, or you can become a patron of Plus Podcast Network and have access to all of these premium shows on our website, EnglishPlusPodcast.com. Now, let me tell you something, and I want to be honest. Subscribing to our channel is not only because you're getting those premium things, just like you can consider subscribing to our channel because you want to support our channel. And that goes naturally with the idea of Patreon because you're supporting us. Of course, you get exclusive stuff when you become our patrons, but the main thing, the most important thing for us, and I hope it is for you at the same time, is that you're supporting English Plus and you're helping English Plus continue. And now I can say along with the rest of the family because I have 20 shows going on at the moment. So I hope you like what we talked about in this episode, and I hope that you decide to support me because that is the only way that helps me continue on with the podcast. And there are great things coming your way, and there is something I'm planning very soon. It will be ready at the beginning of next month, but I'm not going to tell you about that now. I will leave that as a surprise. Now, for now, this is your host, Danny. Thank you very much for listening to another episode from English Plus Podcast. I will definitely see you next time.